My name is Bob Saudelli. I am a member of the Leominster Historical Commission, and these interviews are done in conjunction with the Historical Commission and the Leominster Access Television. Today we are pleased to welcome Mr. Everett Harvie and Mr. Lester Harvie, both of whom grew up in the Rice Hill section of Leominster. And we're also pleased to welcome Everett's wife, Mrs. Laura Harvie, and their daughter. By the way, Mrs. Harvie grew up in Nova Scotia, which is not in the Leominster neighborhood. We haven't got a sign up there yet. And one of their daughters, Ardith Harvie, who also is watching on the monitor, and she was a very fine former student of mine when I taught 6th grade in Lunenburg. I have to clarify one thing before we begin to the audience. Carl and Jack did not pop me in the eye. Yesterday I was unloading some firewood, and I ended up with a little cut, and that's what the Band-Aid is in the shiner. So that's the story on that for anyone who's wondering what happened. Today, as I said, we are going to focus on the Rice Hill section of Leominster, and in a few moments, Mr. Lester Harvie has an appointment that he has to keep, so he's going to be leaving us, but we'll continue the interview with his older brother, Everett. I'm going to direct this first question to Everett, since he's the senior. Where, for the information of our viewing audience, exactly is Rice Hill?
Rice Hill is a steep hill east of Leominster on Mechanic Street, and the Nashua River is at the bottom of the hill, and it goes up through over the top where the gold farm is now in business, where you can buy your sweet corn and so forth in the season. It is an area that is really a gateway, if we might say, to the region called Leominster, but it's also strategic in the way the railroad was laid out so that it would go up through the narrows, through the hills west of Leominster. That's the only way they could get up through it and maintain their grade. So it's quite a, I would say, a gateway. It's also a gateway going toward Boston. We have new roads there now, but originally there was a turnpike called 5th Massachusetts up in Fitchburg. It's known on our road map as Old Union Turnpike. That's an extension of Harvard Street going down through across Fort Devens. It was a direct road into Boston.
So it's got a lot of history attached with it,
Yeah.
both from the old days and now today with the new roads. Lester, so for people new to Lunenburg, Everett just gave us a little description of where it's located. For people brand new to Leominster or recently moved into Leominster, the Gove Farm, I recognize where that is. The Derby Farm, now some people wouldn't recognize that because the Derby Farm is no longer there.
No.
Orchard Hills?
Orchard Hills.
Orchard Hills was a Lawrence Gold Farm.
Yeah.
And the White Pond area, would that be included?
Right.
That's the general vicinity.
Top portion of it anyway.
That's around the Johnny Appleseed, back of Johnny Appleseed Monument.
Not far from Johnny
off
Appleseed.
Nashua Street Extension, they call it. I think they call it Johnny Appleseed Lane now.
Right, the John
And that
Chapman,
originally
Johnny
went
Appleseed.
right down around the high ground and comes out on Route 70 down below the Dufour
So it's in that
salvage area.
That neck of the woods.
Right.
Yeah. During what decades were you youngsters on Rice Hill?
Well, we moved down in the spring of 1919. We lived in Fitchburg on Mount Globe Street, and I can remember we piled into a sedan, I believe, and when we first came down. And I think the Red Bridge was one of the first landmarks that we noticed, and Mother pointed it out, well, we're not too far now from where we're going to live. And So that's the way we came down.
The old Red Bridge.
But
and
this was a strategic place. My father was working at Fort Devens, electrical work down there. This was after the war, and he found that would be a convenient place to set up a homestead.
That was World War I, by the way.
That's
World
the end of
War I.
World War One. That was all over. I can remember World War One armistice, and we were living in Mount Globe Street in Fitchburg, and all the church bells started to ring, and the whistles blew, and I said, "Mama, why is all the noise? What is all the bells about?" "Oh, Sam," she says, "the war is over."
World War I. I never forgot. You
And I never forgot that. And that was the fall. That was before we moved down there.
So the 20s.
This is 1919, and I started school in fall of 1920.
20. So you were there, and less of the 30s. So
Yeah.
your family
Yeah.
lived on Rice Hill moved there in 1919.
Yeah, it runs up to
Up through the 50s.
pretty close to the 70s, I believe. We both are a little
70s.
hazy on when it was sold, but we have it written down. But Bouchard was the name of the people that bought it?
Not Ron, I forget his first name, but Bouchard, he's the contractor there, the big
Sets
construction
up foundation forms and
so
pours
that-
foundations.
The Harvie family was on Rice Hill for a long time,
Yeah.
an extended period of
Good
time.
50 years, I think.
Good 50 years.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit in our conversation before the interview about the origin of the name of Rice Hill. Some neighborhoods in Leominster, the name is obvious as to its origin. South End, that's directional, the west side. French Hill, there were a lot of people who had a French origin, people of French origin. But Rice Hill, we talked about this, and we're not sure. That's something that we'll have to perhaps ask the Historical Society, or perhaps it's I personally, the climate, I don't think there was a lot of rice growing around here, but perhaps it's a family name. And I sort of think that's what it might be. I know King's Corner, I wondered about that, and that was a surname. That was a family name. So Rice Hill. What did the neighborhood look like then? Was it houses?
Across from where we were, there was a wonderful, excuse me, pine woods. So I don't know how, I would say original pine, because they were pretty good size, or some hemlock up in some of the humps there, the kind of gravelly hilltops. But that, I think, was logged off about 1924. And they had quite a setup there, and quite a lot of brush and so forth, and then somebody would come in and cut the brush and pile the cordwood. And I often remember pine, of course, grows takes a lot of room and a lot of different shapes. So some of that wood that was piled up, it was piled so loosely that I think if you really repiled them snugly, you'd never come up with a cord of wood. But anyway, that's the way they...
During the fall, our dad used to go up there and cut the hardwood for the stove and the furnace wood.
We burned wood for...
We hauled that down on a
all through
bobsled
the
originally.
20s, yeah.
So it was Rice Hill. It's still...
But I've never seen
farm
any
area.
reference to rice or to white. But
Right,
White's
White's
Pond
Pond.
is prominent, and originally the evidence there that they had a grist mill. I somewhere saw a picture of photos of buildings in that area, but I can't remember where it was now. But the mill itself was long and gone, but the moat was there, and that always fascinated me. It was so true, just carrying down to this opening, and there was a drop there where the water wheel must have been.
On White's Pond.
Yeah, and I have an idea that might have been the original outlet, and they diverted that a little further one side and put that mold in it. But
So-
that was so true there, and all sodded up and dry, but mine been 5 feet wide at the top, at least 4 feet deep.
So as a child, you remember
Yeah,
seeing
and
that?
these things, we used to ice up there, and when we finally built an ice house, my father put up an ice house, and we'd cut ice up there and haul it
Harvest ice
down.
in the winter
Yeah.
for refrigeration
It
purposes.
wasn't too long after that where ice was being peddled around, so we didn't bother harvesting.
So the
No.
Rice Hill area was, and it still is fairly rural.
Yeah.
But it was naturally more rural at that time.
Right,
You
right.
had some
That was
neighbors.
basically farmland
But
at that
basically
time.
farmland.
Right, yeah.
It's about a quarter mile Johnny Appleseed's monument, and then going out the other way on Nashway Street toward North Leominster, at Lawrence Street, there's a little plot there that been there since I can remember and didn't realize what it was till several years ago. But it's the first cemetery in Leominster,
Ah,
and it's at that time it was all maybe a 20-foot square wire fence around it.
was,
There were a lot of briars, but I don't never.
Was it an
found
old
out.
family?
I never examined it enough to see if there's any stones or anything in there.
Perhaps an
Who
old
was buried there?
family plot, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, because the area was settled, the Whiting Gate place out beyond Johnny's Seed Market on Nashway Street. That's one of the old. I think I read, looking up the history in the library, that was about the third oldest house in the
Whiting Gate.
Leominster. But White's Pond, I just think that perhaps that was the first grist mill, which would be the natural first mill built, because I read about it in Nova Scotia is the same way. They were very punctual in getting a grist mill going and
To grind the
to
corn.
grind the grain so they
Grains.
could get their
Bread.
feed the people
Yes.
that were coming in.
We're gonna have to leave.
Just
Probably a
now,
week.
Everett, I'm going to interrupt for a moment. Lester has to go. I just have to ask you
Okay.
a couple of questions. You had an interesting way, and now today, the contrast between then and now, we have bicycle shops, and we have all these 50, I don't know, 10-speed bikes are passe, I guess now. They're, how did you had an interesting way of getting your bicycle in
Well, there
those
used to
days.
be the old Leominster dump, which was on Mechanic Street, and that's all filled in now. It's in the top covered and everything, but there used to be an awful lot of old parts for bicycles and strollers and that type of thing that were dumped in the dump, and we used to pick up some of those and put the various parts together for our bicycles. And it had rubber tires, there was no fenders or anything on them, a set of handlebars, but we could make up whatever we had a need for and use those as...
So reduce, reuse, recycle is not a new
Right.
thing.
Right, And then also, as I mentioned, baby carriages and strollers. There was the baby carriage factory there in Leominster, and they used to throw out a lot of the components for baby carriages. So we'd pick up those and put the things together for people that had a need for baby carriages.
That's. I wish. I know you have a commitment. You have to go to an appointment. Is there any one last thing you would like to mention of your memory from your memories of growing
Well, I
up
think
on Rice?
basically it was a typical rural family, and our dad always was a provider. He was an electrician, and he always worked. He had his own garden where he grew the vegetables and everything. He had a 5-acre piece of land, and in the earlier days, they had a horse and buggy, which my mother used to drive into town whenever she needed anything. And then we had a cow. We always raised chickens. She'd make her own butter from the milk from the cows, and so it was pretty much self-sufficient. And whatever we had to have, we used to buy in stores in Leominster. But we always had plenty to eat, and a good part of it was vegetables and fruit from the gardens, and my mother used to can those, and it lasted through the whole summer until the next fall.
It sounds like a wonderful
It was a wonderful bringing up, and I have a lot of credit to give to my parents for the way I've turned out, really.
Turned out very well, excellently.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay,
Lester,
I wish I could
Mr.
stay
Harvie.
longer, but yeah.
We appreciate
Nice
it.
meeting
and,
you.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Yeah, okay, good enough. I'll unhook you somewhere.
Okay. See you
Thanks.
later, Lester. Thanks for
Mr.
coming.
Harvie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take
Nice
care.
meeting you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.
Everett, can you tell us something about, a little bit about that ice harvesting that came before the Iceman
Yes.
delivery started? Because
Well,
that's certainly something that isn't done today.
Yeah, well, my father got most of his stones and built an ice house, mostly built into a bank. So he put field stone walls up for the support the roof. And then we'd pile the ice in and bring in sawdust, and just so that there'd be quite a distance, a foot or two, maybe 18 inches or so. You'd put sawdust, hopefully all around that ice to preserve it.
That would insulate it from...
But we used to haul it down with, well, we had a tractor. At that time it was kind of a build-up tractor, I think. And I can't remember, must have been, we had a farm wagon, probably that was what it was, because we had the conveyance anyway to move the ice down. But my father would saw that all out by hand. They have what's called an ice saw with long teeth, and it'll take quite a lot of ice out once it goes up. But he would use that, and he would cut all the cakes, and my brother and I would get them on the wagon and tractor, and we'd haul them down and put them in the ice house. But ice then, of course, they had ice cutters that were really a series of chisels sticking down, and it was drawn by a team, and they had a guide to, if you made one mark, well, then the guide would ride on, and then that would give them the distance they wanted and the size of ice. But that cut down maybe 4 or 6 inches, and then you could break the ice with a chisel, break it off, and they'd pretty well come out in good chunks. But we didn't have that. But ice finally went out because of the fact that they had an artificial plant in North Leominster, Harris Ice, where and they had a storage there for apples, and they produced all the ice that was needed. The cakes weighed something like, oh, I don't know, must have been a couple of 100 pounds, maybe more, 200 or 300. I couldn't handle a cake, but they were pretty good size, and that's the way they...
What other changes do you, the refrigeration, we take so many modern conveniences for granted. What you saw a span of time from the beginning, near the beginning of the 1900s.
Well, before we had ice, why we used to have a pretty cool cellar. We didn't have any central heat then, so the cellar was always quite cool.
How did you heat the house?
Now, we had wood-burning stoves, one in the living room, and sometimes we'd have coal or coke maybe to put in there. But mostly when we first went down, there was probably a third of the land was covered in trees, so we gradually worked those into firewood. And that, my father used to, as Lester said, he'd go off, he'd get done work Saturday noon, but then he'd probably go down some wood lot that he had negotiated to buy the wood, sanding timber, particularly Goodall, I think it was, had lots down toward Lancaster. What's now 190, it used to go down through there. So he'd go down and cut wood, and he might get out 5 or 6 cord, and we'd haul it up with a one-horse.
To heat your house. So
wagon.
what about electricity? Did you?
Well, in 1921, where big changes came, and I can remember Model T Fords going up the hill and chugging along. Some of them had to go up and they wouldn't quite make it. They had to turn around, back all the way down, or back down, turn around and back up. And that occurred every once in a while. That, well, Dufours didn't have enough gas today. Pardon me. So in 1921, I remember asking my father, do you ever think we'll get one of those cars going up the hill like that? My father kind of didn't say too much. But in 1921, he came out driving home with a runabout Model T Ford.
That must have been exciting for you kids.
You just come up the steep driveway, the lower driveway is quite a little climb, and it stalled right about the time he got up the top. And he had quite a little time getting it going, but it started up anyway. And had I think Piper was with him. He was working with him, electric work.
Now your Piper, Mr. Piper was an electrician.
This
Your dad was
William Piper.
William Piper, and your father was an electrician.
Yeah,
and
they worked together on McCarty's electrical company then.
And many of the older houses in Leominster were wired by your dad.
Factories, a lot of the houses, and a lot of the new ones were going up in French Hill, particularly the Deckers.
And you helped as a young
he
kid.
used to take me up just to hold the wire, or hold one end while he pulled the wire through it.
What about a telephone?
No, telephones, we didn't get one of those for some time, but we got electricity in 1921, and I think then we got steam heat in, and the Wasp brothers came down and put that in. And then, of course, we had electric lights by that time. But they didn't have we had to have a line from the street. They finally got it down.
Prior to the electric lights, as a young kid, what kind of?
Well, there was always lamps.
Lamps, kerosene?
And, kerosene lamps, and they always had to be cleaned. But for a year at least, we used lamps. Lamping for the outside work, I can remember going out, my father getting a lamp, and, well, Sam, let's go out and get some apples. And we'd go out and pick up apples that had dropped off from the Baldwin tree or something like that.
In our little conversation before in the anteroom, you had said, I know you kids did a lot of walking. And when you used to you were in Scouts, and you would go from Rice Hill up to
we'd go out Nashway Street.
And on your bike. And you told me an interesting little anecdote about it was very, very dark. The bike had no lamp. No. And how would you, in the pitch dark, how would you?
Really, you'd ride by the feel of the seat when you're sitting on the seat. Just as soon as the wheel tracks always seemed to be nice and smooth. There wasn't many little stones there, but they got all pushed off to the side. So there was always this wheel track, and if you got in that, why, you'd ride nice and smooth. But just as soon as you veered a little off, you'd hit these little gravelly, rocky side, and you got to get back here. And so that's the way you felt your way along, and you'd kind of look ahead, and you can see the glow of the stars shining on the road a little bit, but there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of shade too.
Very, very, very.
You had to maneuver. And it was quite a winding road around following the river and about level.
Now you mentioned the river, the Nashua River. You remember the old Red Bridge.
Yeah, that was.
Which was a wooden bridge, narrow, over the Nashua River on Nashua Street. Just at the base of Gove Hill, of Rice Hill going up towards Goves. And you even remember what happened to the old Red Bridge.
Well, before that, when we were going to school later, we got in, I don't know what grade it was, but Charlie Gates got the contract to run a barge, pick up all the school children from up around the hill down Harvard Street. And he'd pick them up as he came around, and he'd go out Nashway Street over to the school. And I remember him remarking one day about the Red Bridge. He says, you know, when I was a boy, I used to go swimming off of that Red Bridge. But all through the 20s, that river was polluted.
Yes.
And it was polluting the air, particularly in the summer. And anything was ever a blessing was when they finally got that cleaned up after the war. Cleaned up the Nashville,
yes.
And that's one of the things I remember. The summers were so obnoxious at times.
Because of the pollution of the sewage and
it was an open sewer, that's all it was.
And then the factories, paper mills.
There was a dam down where I don't know, Worcester Consolidated Transportation people,
yes,
anyway, they had a dam there.
Leominster Lake.
But I think that went out in the 38 hurricane,
yes,
if I remember right.
Around that era.
But these flats the water would recede in the summer and evaporate and leave those flats exposed, and that's where the pollution would come from. I remember Mr. Gold, when I worked for him, and I worked there 7 years, and he said, well, when I first come around here, I used to hook up a team about 4 in the morning and take a load of wood down a
team of horses.
To what was then the Leominster Park, part of that complex. That's where Leominster's recreation was.
Leominster Lake. They
Leominster Lake.
Right, Leominster Lake.
The people that made potato chips had a place there where they were making them, and that wood was to heat up the fat to make the chips. And he said he'd take it down there and get back and start milking afterwards.
Interesting, interesting. The Red Bridge was replaced by a beautiful structure, the Saudelli Bridge.
Saudelli Bridge, and that was built by Trager and Lorenzi.
And it was a beautiful, we have at the commission, we have photographs of that. And the Saudelli Bridge lasted a very short time because there were floods in 1936. Washed that bridge out.
Yeah, there was water that flooded, and the rains came, and snow melted all at once. And when I was down there, the water just seemed to be up almost to Nashway Street. There's quite a little Nashway Street as you went out toward North Leominster along there, had a field stone wall built up, so the road had been graded out to that, and then it dropped off quite a bit. And there's quite a field there. Well, that field was all just covered with water, and I imagine further up in Whitney Field, where Searstown is now, I imagine that was all
floodplain. All that area is floodplain.
So much water trying to get under that bridge, it just eventually eroded all the north, the upstream side next to the Leominster, and that's where the bridge sagged down, and then all of a sudden it collapsed. To break up.
So you saw.
And I think about a half an hour. I can remember Mr. Johnson. He lived in the house right side of us there in Nashway Street, in the corner mechanic. Bridge is gone. He let out this tremendous roar. Bridge is gone. And it just disintegrated and broke up.
And that bridge was then replaced by a bridge that was better designed by, I guess, perhaps the Corps of Engineers. And it's the current bridge. It's the bridge that exists there now.
Yeah, that's the one. It's all supported by I-beams. I don't know what condition the I-beams are, whether they're ever...
It's got some age on it now. There's many of the bridges and much of the infrastructure.
But that bridge has been there ever since.
I have a question that was just moments ago was passed to me. I have to ask you about your first motorcycle. We talked about your bicycle experience. What about your first motorcycle?
Albert and Albert's my next brother.
Another brother.
Between I and Lester. But we decided we'd like to get a motorcycle, and that was about 1937. And we went up to Fitchburg, got one of these Indian Scouts that are made in Springfield. And I remember driving it home the first time I ever kind of got a little used to sitting on it and starting up. But I started off up Fitchburg, and I came down, must have come down around Ringe Road or somewhere, and got out where I'd pick up 13. I think 13 had been built in the early or middle 30s. Had been extended over to 2. Well, I got on 2 and then 13. I remember it took me quite a while, but I finally drove down. But so Albert he drove it when we took it to work. He was working at Derby's. I was working over at Go's. But I remember one day I was riding that motorcycle, a pretty straight stretch after you got over top of Rice Hill, headed toward the line there, and I opened it up, but I had quite a turn, and you kind of dropped around. I got down there, and before I could get my speed down, I was way across here, and I probably just missed the post about 4 feet. Oh. And I decided then, well, I don't know, the motorcycle's for me, but anyway. It wasn't too long after that we got interested in rototillers. That was safer. More our speed. So I think we finally sold that.
And you wouldn't have, I know in those days you didn't wear helmets riding motorcycles.
We just had a cloth helmet.
And you don't have to wear helmets working rototillers.
No.
Well, I'm glad that you missed that poll. Just thinking that you and your family, you remember before there was a Route 2.
Yes, you see.
Before there, of course, was an I-190. So you remember that era?
Yeah, this, Route 2 was talked about, where is what's now 2A. Of course, it used to be Route 2, but they talked quite a while about that before the war. And I can remember where the first line came down. It swung way south of Fort Devens, but I don't know where it went down there. But anyway, it came right down between our line and what's Warren Go's land now. And
in the survey?
Yeah, just
where they were thinking about.
That's where they thought they'd come, but that was postponed because of the war. And the 3 of us all went into the Army, and I was in just about 5 years before
World War II.
I got out. Anyway, then they interest in finishing Route 2. They'd built part of that part way up anyway, but anyway, they finally resurveyed it, and it moved it north, so in its present, it had to stay south of the railroad. You couldn't move that for a road, and then it went straight down by the Brick Tavern, only on the north side of the Brick Tavern, where your own Union Pike or your 5th Massachusetts, I don't know what was the official designation. That went just to the Brick Tavern on the south side.
From colonial days.
And then that went right straight across. While I was in the Army there, we camped in Fort Devens out there in the field there. But down on that road going across there, to the left was quite an extensive slate quarry operation. And I can imagine that a lot of the slate around here came from there originally.
Perhaps for the roofs.
But I can remember seeing that.
You had, that's interesting. So
I suppose it's still there. I don't imagine it.
What particularly interesting, and here I'm talking to a gentleman who remembers before there was
Yeah.
Route 2 and before...
Yeah, so then of course Route 2 went right down through, and that was, I can remember when they were building that, and all of that area where it finally come over and the approach to Leominster, well, that was all pasture land there, but by the time they got around to build Route 2, there was some pretty good sized timber growing up on all that land. It was kind of a northern slope in there, and trees got going, they could go down, get water, I suppose.
Interesting.
When we first went there, I know my father was looking around for wood, but there was 2 huge maples over in back there where this Route 2 goes through now. And they weren't too far apart, maybe 8 feet, I don't know. I wasn't much more than 5 or 6 years old, but they seemed huge, and they might have been at least 2 or 3 feet in diameter. And my uncle and my father were, I think they were sugar maples, because they were growing up there together. And they
They
get in
tapped
there
them?
and cut them up for firewood.
Oh, did you do any tapping of maple trees or anything like
No,
that?
I
Sugar
think I might have tried that a little bit around there, but not too much. On that particular area, though, there was a little little road went up, apparently up around in back of where Clifford's Go's land is there, but that covered the brook. It was a stone bridge, really, field stones laid down, and that was apparently a wagon road right up through there to cut down across and get on Ashway Street from Mechanic. But
you mentioned how modern conveniences, how it was then, how things have changed, and there's a contrast. Many of the children today, you walked a lot as a kid, rode your bike. But what about getting to school? Many of the kids take buses today. How did you?
When we first started,
you went to Pierce School.
Yeah, we went to North Leominster, and I always used to figure that might be about a mile, but I was scaling out on the map, probably nearer 2 miles out there. But anyway, we used to walk up the hill to White Street, probably cut across the land to get on there, and then we'd walk up Harvard Street, and where Harvard joined up on Prospect was what they called a stone farm, and that's where we'd pick the car up going to Prospect.
A car, an automobile?
Electric car.
Electric car.
Electric car line went from North Leominster right down through the air, and that we would. They gave us tickets to ride the car. So they were five.
Trolley car, electric
yeah, trolley car. That's what it was, and they were 5 cents each. So we'd give them a 5-cent ticket, get on the car. But while we would wait there, there was a fellow named Freddie LaFave at a farm. They lived on the farm down about half a mile. He came along with his bike, and he always apparently wanted some ballast on his bike. So when he coasted down a Prospect Street and got on that long slope going, he could coast up to the hill without pumping. So I was designated the ballast. So I'd get on and on his carrier there, and away we'd take off, and he'd pump just as fast as he could get over that first little hump there by it was Nutting's place right side of it. And we'd get on that slope and go down, and he'd practically coast right up to the schoolyard.
You mentioned too, sometimes you would take the barge to school. Now, barge I think of as something floating,
later.
but this was tell us about the barge. Now, this was a wagon, horse-drawn.
Well, I want to just mention the car tickets. They were 5 cents a piece. Well, of course, if I rode his bike down there, I saved a car ticket. So about the time these big all-day suckers come along, I can remember
big lollipops.
I needed a nickel to buy one. So I touched Wallace Gove, the youngest Gove boy. He was going down, and they had to buy their tickets. So I'd sell him a couple for a nickel.
You were a businessman, a budding
I
businessman.
remember getting a nickel and going down a channel store there and getting that all-day sucker. So speaking about the barge, well, we rode the car for, can't remember how long it was, 2 or 3 years maybe. But then Charlie Gates got a contract to transport all the school kids from where he lived up on Harvard Street, above where White Street come out. He'd pick them up there and go down Harvard and around on a Mechanic, and then they'd come down by Mechanic out Nashway Street. So he had this barge that, drawn by 2 horses. It was an express type wagon, not too heavy a wheel, but they were probably 5 foot
Was it
diameter
covered?
wheels, yeah.
Covered in any way?
And he had this covered in. I don't know, it seems to me that was more or less permanent. It wasn't canvas. But anyway, you get up, climb up in steps in the back, and they had a door there, if I remember right. And so it was pretty well closed in, except the air came in the front pretty much in volumes a lot of the time.
Must have gotten pretty cold in the winter.
Yeah, but that would be what they used as long as there wasn't any snow. And then when snow came, he had the same thing, but drawn by 2 horses, a double express type sled.
It was a sled.
They were lightweight sleds, one front and one in the back. Now I remember you added, blacksmith add on about 3 more feet so you could get another seat or 2 on there. And then you'd have to climb in under the canvas he had on there to get into those seats. The barges, if I remember right, we sat along the side, back to the outside. But the sleigh, it seems to me we climbed
So what
inside.
a contrast between then and now. We have the buses and modern transport, automobiles, and, air-conditioned automobiles, heat in the winter, you know, and there you were going to school sometimes in a wagon.
Sometimes I got tired of riding in it while you might run out and jog along. I remember Amos Page once, he was jogging quite a ways ahead, and Charlie remarked about him running. The fellow makes pretty good time.
He was able to jog at the same time.
Run along.
Beat the wagon, or be with me there with the wagon. Is there any, Everett, Mr. Harvie, is there any particular thing that stands out that you would like to share with us before we conclude this interview?
Yes,
on your growing up in Leominster. And it sounds like a wonderful upbringing in childhood.
I often think about the area, and of course, we didn't speak anything about the railroad coming in, but that railroad, when it came in, it might have been around early third of the 1800s or something, when railroads began to expand. By the time Civil War came on, while railroads pretty well were what really won the war for the Union, I think.
Very significant.
Because they were the means of transportation, where the Revolutionary War was fought more or less by ships.
Yes.
Who had the most ships at the strategic place? Well, that's what happened down in Yorktown. The French had joined and they had ships. But anyway,
I can tell you
railroad
came I can
through
tell
there.
you love history.
Yeah, and the railroad, I read about it, and there's quite a lot of controversy on how they could get around. They wanted to, some of them wanted it to swing around, come up through Leominster, and others didn't want it, they wanted to come up. But anyway, the people that decided on North Leominster, and I don't know when the New York, New Haven finally got into Leominster, or it was afterwards probably, but Leominster had 2 railroads, different systems. And anyway, but the road, they always picked see where the way the turnpike came, they came through here because that was a strategic place to hit that gap, what they call the Narrows, getting up in the garden there in the Westminster area. And so that's the way they routed Route 2. They followed more or less the same route the turnpike came. And then they decided that Rice Hill didn't have enough roads down there, so they put 190 up so
yeah.
and practically
Yes.
bridged the whole hill.
Yes.
Only it was going north-south instead of east-west. So that was a
That's a significant change. Well, Everett, Mr. Harvie, I wish to thank you, and
you can call me
Lester.
Sam. Everybody else does.
Sam.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, and I want to thank Lester, and I want to thank your beautiful wife and your beautiful daughter who are watching this. I'm one of my former students, and for sharing your experiences of growing up on Rice Hill. And finally, I wish to thank the viewing audience for their attention and for watching. Thank you very much.
Well, one thing I'd like to add was I think you asked me what is outstanding to me and happened down there. And I think the outstanding event that happened was the cleaning up of the Nashua River. Because before that, it was just an unsavory atmosphere that we lived in, and cleaning that river was a big help in the creation of all of these shopping centers that we have now over in Whitney Field, which couldn't have been possibly put up beside that river the way it was when we lived through the 20s and the 30s. And we owe it all, I think, to a lady down in Groton that really started public opinion. And
was it started?
Forced people in government particularly to start obeying the laws that we had to clean up instead of discarding everything. And the dump is the same way. They have to dispose of things now in a fashion that doesn't pollute your neighbor. And that's what happened in those days.
And
thank you, and I appreciate
being on
your
sir.
program.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Harvie.
Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.